Welcome to the Midlife Pilot Podcast. We are glad you're with us. What is it like to become a pilot in your 40s and 50s? The challenges are unique for those of us in midlife, but so are the rewards. Hosts Ben, Brian, and Ted talk learning to fly, growing as pilots, and the joy of flying to destinations. The purpose of the podcast is not to teach, but to share knowledge and experiences of being a midlife pilot. Join the Midlife Pilot community and listen in every week. We are not CFIs or particularly intelligent, so if you want to learn how to fly, talk to anyone else other than the hosts of a podcast. Even this intro was too challenging for us, and we used a robot to do it. Okay, checklists are complete. Let's get the show started.
Hello, and welcome to episode 182 of the Midlife Pilot Podcast, where we share the experiences and challenges of flying in midlife. My name is Ben. I'm a commercially rated pilot based here in the Atlanta metro area, and joining me tonight are my friends, starting with Brian Siskin, who is based in Nashville, flies a Cherokee 180 named Lucy, and who is a checkride survivor. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Good evening. Glad to be here. Excited for our guest, and this is going to be a momentous evening.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. Also joining us from the West Coast, it's our friend Timestamp Tepper flying Tedder, something like that.
It all works.
Tedder with a temper.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
You've probably never had a temper in your life. I don't know. You seem pretty easygoing.
I am glad to be here. I am wearing shorts because it's summer. In the winter, I wear cargo pants. In the summer, I wear cargo shorts. And it is now raining outside. So it is perfectly Pacific Northwest right now.
Very good. And we're getting some of that taste down here in the South as well. I'm also excited to introduce our friend. He is a designated pilot examiner. He is based in the Queen City of Charlotte, North Carolina. And Ron, I know that we haven't gotten a bio from you, but I'm going from memory. I believe at one point in time you were named the NAFI Instructor of the Year. Do I have that correctly?
You do not have that correct.
You're not? Okay.
Ben, you're on a roll.
I was one of the regional, and a couple of years ago, AOPA everybody fills out surveys, and based on my students' feedback, I was a regional instructor of the year through AOPA.
Okay, I wasn't too far off. And you're also received the Lifetime Achievement Award as awarded by AOPA. It's the Wright Brothers.
Wright Brothers Award for 50 years of flying without finding the EFA found anything you did wrong. Yeah.
Very good. See, so I'm not completely off.
This is my 60th year of flying right now.
Wow. That is absolutely incredible. We wanted to bring Ron on, and we'll get to it here in a little bit. We're going to talk all about checkrides, and so he's got sharing some numbers with us. For those of you that listen to this podcast and have had an opportunity to either be instructed by Ron or maybe have him be your examiner for one of your checkrides, you know he is an amazing individual. And, I think Brian and I can both agree we're both richer from our experiences prior to having met him. So we feel very privileged to have him on the podcast tonight. And I know Ted thinks very highly as well through Opposing Bases and all of our other common friends. So
Thank you. You read that exactly as I wrote it. Thank you very much.
yeah, public school education usually works. Not all the time, though. Just wanted to go around the horn real quick. We have not been flying, my brother-in-law and I. The plane is overdue for an oil change, and we cannot get it in until tomorrow. So hopefully I'll get some hours in this week. But I have been studying. I've been advised that if you're going to fly professionally, it's a good idea to start making the transition to Jeppesen instruments, approaches, and SIDS and stars and all the stuff. So I've been going through, there's a lot of YouTube videos out there, and I'm going to give a shout out to our friend Seth Lake, also a DPE, has a great video on going over the differences between the FAA charts and Jeppesen charts. So definitely want to check that out. But I wanted to check in with you guys, Brian. Anything exciting going on since the last couple of weeks?
I've been in a little bit of a decompression mode, and the run that I've done for instrument and commercial has been about, the bathtub of my brain is pretty full, and I'm just kind of letting it drain a little bit. But all that to be said, I cannot sit still. And so I've been organizing in my mind, going about CFI and getting a sense of what that path might look like. And there are some immediate things I can do that are not too, I don't know. When you get into that, you got to be fully into it. But there's some, I still got to take the FIA and a couple of things, so I'm going to focus on that, the smaller pieces for right now. But when you do a check ride with our friend Ron Horton here, and he says after the fact that you should consider, being a CFI, it could just be because he really wants me to learn the material, or it could be that he thinks I'm going to be a good CFI. But, I've had other people, say that, and we need more CFIs that I think are not just using it as a vehicle to get to the airlines. And being a CFI with 275 hours is, possible, and that's great. But I think that maybe he's, leveraging some of this midlife pilot experience to others, I think is a really inviting kind of a path, and just a way of really knowing, codifying, getting out of any kind of, I don't want to say imposter syndrome, but it's hard as you keep going through the ratings. You kind of wonder, like, how did I get here? And so there's no way to miss any areas, right? Like, you've got to know everything. So I like the idea of really shoring up weaknesses and things like that. So anyway, I've just been kind of taking stock and inventory of all that and starting to get an idea of what that looks like, while also kind of taking a little bit of a break. But Ted, it sounds like you've probably been more in the air than any of us in the last week.
Yeah, I've been doing more glider stuff this weekend. My friend should be coming out of annual this week, and go pick it up with a friend of the show, Dominic. But yeah, did a bunch of glider stuff over the weekend. Had a lot of fun doing that. Always do. But first day I just did my own glider flights. And the second day I stuck around because they needed help on the field. And it always takes a lot of people to do glider operations. And so it's like, well, I'm going to stay around until they seem like there's too many people. And so I was there all day.
Yeah.
And it's just great. It's just fun. Go help out and do whatever needs to be done. It's mostly like driving golf carts fast across, the grassy field, towing planes around, grabbing rope off the back of a running engine on a Piper Pawnee, that is one of those things that I am so cautious about, because this whole idea of approaching a plane with a spinning prop, they spin it around so that you're at the tail, and then you grab the rope that's hanging out from behind it, and you've got a tool to pick it up, so you're not risking putting it on your hands and it getting caught or anything else. But still, just standing directly behind the plane to start picking up this rope is not something that I'm used to. The whole, like, I will not let somebody on my plane with the engine running. And here I am walking up to a Piper Pawnee that's running. And so
I have a question.
I'm always very cautious on how I do it.
I thought I saw an Instagram reel. Are there ever any time when the tow plane will pull more than one glider at a time?
I think I've seen that too, but I don't think it's normal. Maybe it is just for like dragging them across country for a tow.
Or maybe it's just to move them to the different side of the airport or something. I don't know. You don't have a golf cart showing up. I don't know. I thought I saw the beginning of that reel where they had 3 of them lined up, and they had little carabiners, spread out, and they would start hooking them up. The gliders are all lined up, but I didn't know if that was a thing or not. So
I've never seen that. It's enough work just to be one person behind a tow plane when you learn how to do that. So
it is fascinating how busy the entire operation is around a glider port. There's so many moving parts, so many things happening, so many individual responsibilities, and a lot of pylons, and just a lot of stuff going on. It's pretty fascinating. It's so cool that you've been able to immerse yourself in that world. Something else I would love to do. Why don't we go ahead and we got a lot to get to. Let's hustle through our listener feedback. Ben, do you want to knock that one out?
I'd be happy to. This comes to us from Papa Tango Zulu in reference to 2 weeks ago. I guess we released it last week. Reference of our Flying Professionally episode. He says, "Great show tonight. As always, your show seems to fill in some. Thank you for giving me a pick me up when I needed it, or just make me take a look closer at something in my pre-flight or sterile cockpit. You guys done more to help me than I can express. Thank you." That was from Papa Tango Zulu. So thank you for that. Please send us feedback and leave us a 5-star review as well in your podcast player.
All right, I'm gonna hustle through this housekeeping because I'm itching to get our guest on here. So I'm gonna truncate it here. You guys know that we do this ad free and we are Patreon supported. So just help us keep it that way. You can join at various levels. 10% goes to Freedom Aviation Network's anti-human trafficking efforts. Go to midlifepilotpodcast.com for all of the things. You can support us on Patreon. There's a PayPal drop link there. You can email us. You can read things, look at things, check out dad hats and other fun merchandise. And if you're enjoying this, just leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and we'll read it on the air. Make sure you hit subscribe or follow. All of that stuff. Ted.
Wow.
It's me, man. I was passing it on to everybody.
The sheet here says Patreon Ted, and then I just went and just merged it all. So
Katie's really
first. I know Katie's shadow's looming over there. Katie, please log in.
Words hard. Yeah.
Yeah. So and Ted.
Yeah, we have some new people that have joined us. I want to say thanks to them. At the Landomatic level, we have Dave K. At Hershey Bar, we have Andy R. and Nicholas M. So thank you for joining us. Also, one of our favorites, Comanche Sue, did a nice PayPal drop to us. It's a nice way for people that don't necessarily want to use Patreon. It's another way you can kind of toss some support to the show if you feel like it. So
awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Comanche Sue is great. I also rounded up some accomplishments or achievements from our people in the last week, and I want to make sure to. A couple of these are really great, so I really want to point them out.
We need to.
Our friend Midlife Aviator, who had done their private ground, and we didn't know if they had completed the practical or not. He completed the practical, and so he got his private pilot checkride done, and he said it was 11 months and 2 days from his discovery flight. Andy R. in Manchester, UK, passed his general skills test. General skills is basically a checkride. And that was at Barton. That's at Echo Golf Charlie Bravo. There's 4 grass runways there. It's always great seeing especially the UK aerodromes, because they just have these beautiful looking fields.
Mm-hmm.
Our friend that goes by Lat on Discord had an hour milestone. They also got their high performance endorsement done in a 182 turbo and had their first instrument lesson.
Nice.
That's nice to see early on too.
Yeah.
Chef Delta Victor did their long cross country toward getting their private near Wendell Geek and said in North Carolina and said the tower controllers were great. I messed up my entry and they helped me down. I love nice controllers at a towered field when you're a student. Like they're helpful. Brian, you got a congrats for getting your commercial from author Richard Bach.
I did.
Amazing.
I was telling my wife, it's sort of like, I don't know, getting a message from Miles Davis at one of your concerts or something. You know, it was
exactly.
It meant a lot. But he said, my grandest congratulations to you, Brian, on your achievement. May you keep flying higher and higher, ever Richard Bach. And I just thought, wow. I mean, if there's ever been an influence into aviation and the magic of aviation and the inspiration of aviation, it really comes from him. And, you know, I was raised with all of that, you know, and a lot of us read Illusions when we were young and it shaped how we think, you know, so long list of amazing books and what a great just human being and force of pure poetry. So anyway, very cool. That was overwhelming.
Yeah.
And then Sport Pilot Chuck.
Yeah. So Chuck, who we spent some time at Oshkosh last year, I think that Chuck had like 3 flights in at Osh last year. He's been going a long way. He's been flying his friends Remos a lot, kind of partnered up on that. And he got his first tailwheel time. I haven't even opened my drink yet. So tailwheel, it's
everybody drink.
Yeah. Here we go. Shared a picture of the very pretty Cessna 185 that he's getting to fly for that. So that was really
amazing.
Yeah. So congrats everyone on getting things done this week.
All right.
So Brian, why don't you kick us off and launch in, since you're the more recent graduate of the Von Horton DPE School of Commercial Check Rides.
Well, so We are lucky enough to be joined by the great Ron Horton this evening, DPE pilot, been flying for 60 years, just getting warmed up, it seems like. And we are so honored to have you here, Ron. And I want to just say that your story is amazing. We typically don't like to start interviews with, tell us your entire aviation story, because especially in your case, Ron, I have to go to bed in probably 4 or 5 hours. And for you to tell your story, I think is a near impossible Cliff Notes task. But all that to be said, before we get into this, and we're doing hopefully 2 things tonight, but the first area of focus is, Ron is a curator of very interesting data around his checkride experiences and gathers a lot of insights that I think everybody will massively benefit from. So whether you are just starting and you want to get a sense of what checkrides are like, or what points are going to be looked at, whether you're coming up on a checkride or a second checkride or a third checkride, you're going to want to stick around for all this. But first, welcome, Ron, and thanks so much for being here.
I'm just glad to be here. It's interesting that you say all these ratings, but you guys, Ben's I'm never from multi. 60 years, I'm the guy that's at the bottom of the food chain, right? All the kids that come in, like I'm doing a checkride tomorrow, not 250, the guy tomorrow has 220 hours for a CFI initial.
Oh, wow.
Because he did the commercial to 141, where he only had to have 190 hours. So they're ahead on the way to the airlines. Exactly what you said a while ago about you, Brian, is that we desperately need people who have been in the real world of aviation for a while. So I actually, again, saw on my 16th birthday, come private when I was 17, flew personal flying, owned a 172 with a friend from church for 30 years, sold it. He bought a 182, and have flown a good bit of flying, Bahamas, Florida, up and down the East Coast, a little bit toward the West, all the way. Well, I've been to Australia several times. But I'm at the guy who's at the entry level where people are getting their private instrument. I do all the single engine check rides up through CFI, but just feel very privileged that the Lord has given me this time to be able to enjoy this. And then, as my lovely bride will say, just be a part of this community that is unlike any other community. Because she says, we just meet the nicest people. And we do. And that's what it's all about. So glad to share. Yes, I'm pretty big on data, or as the Southern boys say, data. So I've got data, and in God we trust. All of us bring data. So I've got that a little to talk about, and it gives kind of an insight into how check rides are done and maybe what some of the success or failure are. It kind of, I believe, data leads to conclusions. So I'm excited to talk about that side. I'm glad to be here. It's what you guys have done, what you guys have put together is service to people, most of whom, while you'll see them on this virtual world and chat, you will never meet them in person, and you're making their lives different. And that's the true definition of service. And I appreciate that.
Wow. Well, speaking of the conflict of success and failure, you have given both Ben and I check rides. And, Ben, your experience with Ron was a few years ago. What are some of the lessons that you feel like you uniquely walked away from your commercial check ride with Ron? And then, Ron, please validate that this actually.
So,
well, I can't really say a lot because you both are still on the installment plan for payment. So my silence has been purchased already.
So I'll say this: Ron and I have and others have a mutual friend in Elliot Cox, Echo Charlie, as a lot of people know him. And the night before my check ride, Ron does this really cool thing that I've never seen another DPE do, where he sends you, I believe he calls it
the book.
He's got a book for private, he's got a book for instrument, commercial, et cetera. And it's, as soon as I got that from Ron, Elliot said, that is gospel. I mean, you have the ACS, you know what you're going to get tested on, but Ron is laying it all out before you. And I kind of went through kind of my game plan. And he just said, he's very thorough in the oral. And I will say, he's not wrong. Elliot was not wrong in that regard. Although it was the most enjoyable oral exam I've ever had because it never felt like I was being tested. Although I was. It just felt like I know a lot of DPEs are trying to make you comfortable, but I thought we were sitting in a hangar just chewing the fat.
Mm.
And there were a couple of times I'm sure Ron said, "You sure about that?" And I said, "Well, let me think about that." And I got so relaxed that I kind of felt like my guard was down. And maybe that's a good thing. I don't know, Brian. I don't know if your experience was the same, but I kind of we finished it up, and it was almost. I was like, I almost don't care if I failed or passed because it was just such an enjoyable conversation. That it was a good time no matter what. But I mean, that was my experience with them.
Yeah, and
practical was fantastic. So
I'll just say real quick that my experience with you, Ron, was very similar, which speaks to your level of consistency with your approach. But also there were points where, Ron, you'd be telling a story that is directly relevant to what we're talking about. And then I would find myself just getting a little bit lost in the interest of the story for a minute. But then if I ever, even for a moment, in the way you put it, Ben, was like letting your guard down. For me, it wasn't really letting my guard down. It was just almost forgetting that I was in the middle of an examination.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, this amazing story that's so enlightening and directly related to what we're talking about. But then all of a sudden, it's like a tunnel. All of a sudden, and so now here's the next thing, and it's like, oh gosh, all right, I'm accountable here for information.
That's right.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
But Ron, I just really appreciated your style. And before we get into your data insights, I just wanted to ask you, obviously DPEs do have styles. They have different ways of going about it, rooted in strong standards and rules and centralized point of view. How did you develop your DPE style, if that's a way to put it?
So one of the things that I did was I had a great mentor for being a DPE when I first came to Charlotte. My background was I worked for a phone company for 30 years and then got an internet startup business, can tell you how to lose a bunch of money if you want to do that. And then spent 14 years at the police department doing technology and then decided to go into the flying part. So by the time at the police department, I met a guy who just retired from flying at age 82. He was a DP for 26 years. When he retired or quit stop flying, he had 23,000 hours, never flew airlines, never flew corporate, 19,000 jewel given.
Holy cow.
So I was his first instrument student in 1984. So we go back a long ways, and he gave me a great example that, yes, there's a test going on. If you know something in the test, we still read the ACS. But and the FAA actually favors that you do what they call scenario-based testing, which I just translate to a bunch of stories, right? So the disadvantage I had when I became a CFI after 47 years of flying was that I had no memory of how I was taught private pilot maneuvers, but I had 47 years of mistakes to build on to teach other people. Similar to what all you guys have done, when you all become CFIs sooner or later, which if you will, you have several hundred hours and several years of time of things that were not just coming out of the textbook. And so I try to make that test such that we will talk about the things that are practical, that I remember several times it's called a practical test. I'm not, for example, in CFI, I don't spend 3 hours on fundamentals of instruction because the stuff that is important is the things we see every day. And they come out, but not asking questions specifically about that. So I believe that having a scenario based and if you can talk about a real life situation to put themselves in, then that's has been my goal. And it seems to work out. Although I do talk a little bit long, but then again, it's always good to have a story.
You've got a few. So Ted, why don't you help us get to, because I feel like this is an area that a world that you live in is also data related. And so I just thought maybe you could help us funnel into introducing this data set that we're going to be looking at this evening.
Yeah. Ron, I assume that this was that your data is given as a presentation to FAA or to other DPEs?
So what I do is I collect data and we go through the slides. I'll talk about the fact that I keep this in every checkride I've ever done, all grades, whatever. The summary you're going to see here that I sent you all primarily covers all the checkrides, all the different ratings, certificates and what the pass-fail rates, then it gets into more detail in the private check rides, because that, I figured what bulk of the audience is. And I presented that, for example, the school where I teach, we have 25 instructors. So every 6 months, I'll go through and say, here's what we've been doing in the last 6 months. You're doing well teaching these. These over here, we need to improve on. So I use the data for that. And then also create a report card, which another one follows as an example, that if an instructor wants to hear that, and the student does, I can send them back a report card getting the ratings for each of their things and comments on what happened there. So yeah, I'm an aviation data geek. Yeah, the spreadsheets are color-coded, of course.
So, Ron, I wanted to kind of start off in one of the first slides, and we're going to work on getting this on the screen, but we also have a large number of people that just listen to us and don't watch the live stream.
Right.
And so I wanted to kind of hit the first one, and there's this for everybody is the percentage of pass for all different schools being private, instrument, commercial, CFII, initial, and CFII. And the pass rate for the private is 72%. And I don't know, I was a little surprised. I felt like that number was lower than I expected. I'm just curious, and one of the other stats that we'll get to in a minute does this necessarily mean that it's a failure or a weather discontinuance, or is it there was something that the student did during either the oral or the practical that did not meet standards and you had to discontinue?
So the 72% for private, 64 for instrument, 80 for commercial, 100 for double I, because there are not very many of those. It has the tier name small numbers. 83% for initial, for an overall pass rate of 77%. That was in 2025. That is people who actually failed the check ride.
Gotcha.
That's not discontinuous, it's not anything else. They actually failed the check ride. There you go. So that means that they failed it. And that number, by the way, that's so roughly 80% for the total. That number has stayed the same. I've now done over 500 check rides. And out of the first 10, 8 of them passed. And that roughly 80% has stayed the same for the hundreds of check rides since then. It's just, you'll have 10 in a row that passed, and then 3 in a row will fail. So it just depends. But the number at the bottom where it said 29% of all check rides discontinued, that meant that they had some reason, discontinuances are either for weather, mechanical, or usually weather, sometimes mechanical, or a few of them, the person just feeling bad, like an August day, and they're bouncing around up in the air and saying, my stomach said all the fun I can have today. Let's come back in the morning when it's smoother. Which means if you take the 29% of that and you take the 23, in other words, it ends up that only about 48% were complete on the first day. The remainder of them either failed or were discontinued.
So the instrument pass rate is 64%. And so I wonder, why would you think, Ron, in your observation, do you think that those candidates struggle perhaps more than private or commercial?
Well, instrument is more technical. And the other big issue we have nowadays is the equipment that they are flying. So back in the day, back in the Stone Ages, you talk about, we haven't been doing this long. I have a friend who's about the same age I am. We had one 172 together. His dad was taught to fly by a guy who was taught by Wright. So I'm only 4th generation. You guys are 5th or maybe 6th generation. It just hasn't been that long as far as stuff that's going on that's there. So instruments. So think about back when I was learning instruments, learning to fly. Period. Every airplane had 6-pack. Every airplane had 2 nav coms that looked the same. And you went back, we walked at the airplane. The only thing we had was a sectional. We had no headsets, which I have hearing aids now. I've like over the years. And it was just a much simpler world to learn things. And nowadays, like at our school, we have 11 172s and we have CFII also in other airplanes. But just for those 11 172s with the avionics in them, because I do our website, part of our website, there's over 5,000 pages of manuals to look at for all the avionics. So that's part of the issue. Matter of fact, the last 2 or 3 fairs I had, we're all not understanding managing the avionics. Even something as simple as, you fly, you get the approach loaded, everything does, it hits the final approach fix, it intercepts the glide slope, and then the autopilot doesn't start a deal. What do you think that might be, those of you with autopilots?
Yep.
They never push the APR button.
Right.
And that guy had been trained, he was trained in an airplane that had no autopilot and had a 430 in it, and he shows up and takes the check ride in an airplane with two G3Xs, two GI-275s, a GFC 500 and 750. So the best part of the issue with that being lower rate is simply a more technical rating to get nowadays than it was when you only had, only 2 or 3 approaches types to choose from.
And that was my issue on multi was avionics. There was a ghost needle glide slope, and I thought it was actual glide slope, and it was showing me where I needed to be, and I wasn't there. And so I went below. I want to hit this question
and
from...
even the ones,
go ahead.
Sorry. Even the ones who have the avionics, HSI, the G5, the HSI, I'd say at least 80% of students have no idea how to fly an HSI.
Right.
They don't understand what it does. They don't understand the D-bar and how to intercept it. And the instructors apparently, although the instructors were taught at a school with G1000s, most of them came from a school with G1000s, apparently nobody's ever explained to them how an HSI works. So that's also an issue when they get into stuff that they simply don't understand the avionics.
The Ugly Cup in our chat asked, and I think I understand this, but so on that 77% total pass rate, that meaning 23 failed, you don't mean that they failed and dropped out. You mean that they had to go for a retake at some point.
Yes, yeah. All of these people ended up, I've only had a couple of people, I've never had anybody who failed and then just gave up. I know 2 pilots who that happened to them, but just weird situations. Right. But in this case, there's 23% ended up passing on retest. Most of them on the first retest. I have had a couple that it took them 4 tries before they finally passed.
Right.
In those 2 cases, it was totally, 90% the CFI's fault, because I can tell whether they're prepared or not prepared.
Wow. So CFII, I know that's not a large sample, but 100% pass rate. Do you think that that's sort of a matter of self-selection results in the sense that anybody that's going for that is likely already pretty on top of their game, or is it just due to the number, or what do you think?
It's kind of like it's the last one you get in this sequence before you head out to ATP and stuff. So you've had several check rides before. You've had the technical part of it in your instrument check ride already. So the bottom line is you're not really doing a lot new. Now, CFII, you're not doing a lot new, but you still have to learn fundamentals instruction and stuff. So plus in this case, this particular year, I think maybe all of those came from the school where I teach and have given enough feedback to instructors that they know what to expect, what to prepare for, and how to get people ready. And that's probably a part I would do too. I do check rides for a lot of schools, but probably at least 50, 60% are from the school where I teach.
And probably the schools you're at the most often, whether you're there or not physically, are the ones that pay attention to failure rates and feedback so that doesn't happen again. Where if you go to a school twice in a year, do 2 check rides, they don't have a sample set big enough to say, oh, we're not teaching this very well.
Well, Ted, it really depends upon the interests of the CFI. So, for example, both of those guys who failed 3 times, their instructor came with them to all of the check rides, never spoke to me, never asked a question in the debrief, never called me up after. And as a matter of fact, the guy who failed his instrument 3 times, he's the only guy I've ever had who failed all 3 approaches. And then he came back and failed all 3 approaches again, because he did the exact same thing he did the time before. And the instructor never talked to me to find out what he was doing wrong.
Wow.
So generally, you see a lot of cases, and it just breaks my heart because I know that these people had the intelligence and the drive to do it, and the CFI simply doesn't care. We have unfortunately a number of CFIs who they do not, because I've heard them talking, I'm not going to care about my pass rate. I'm going to read you with a FERC if I have to. And I've also talked with people who say when they go to the airlines, they ask you about the pass rate or failure rate for your personal check rides, but never for check rides you have your students have given.
Interesting.
Oh,
So
wow.
it depends really upon the interest of the school and the interest of the instructors, whether or not they want those people to be ready for the next time. I've had one guy, he failed. One of our instructors, he sent me 5 people, 4 of them failed. And for the last 3, I just took the exact same text and cut and pasted because he failed the exact same reasons on the following 3 students.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's gotta be frustrating too, I think, when you are, you've got quite a legacy and you come from, this lineage and all of this, and to see anything that feels like a lack of regard for aviation, just in general, right? As opposed to even just the finer points of being an instructor. That's gotta be, I don't know, as much it's an opportunity to correct some things and to shape some things, but it's also probably frustrating.
Very frustrating, it really is. Because I can tell from talking to the people and from the way the answers stuff, you can tell. I mean, if somebody, it's very obvious when you give them the scenario, they have no idea what you're talking about. Even including these are things that maybe they even missed on the written test. They missed a question. We don't know what the question was. We know the area. We're going to cover them on that area. So if they haven't done that, then obviously CFI did not do a very good job of reviewing that.
Yeah, that lack of kind of pride from the CFI is interesting to me. I want to go through this slide really quick, and we're going to move on to the next one. But you tallied up your check ride times, how long it took for ground and flight, and you've got a year-by-year comparison, but we'll just speak on as being about the same. Looks like ground is almost always 3 hours. It can be shorter for commercial, and it's definitely longer for CFI initial, which we all know that CFI is like the marathon check ride. I noticed that all your flight times are 2.0 to 2.4. I felt like when I see people doing private check rides, they're always like 1.2. I was always surprised at how short they are.
So there are DPEs who give shorter check rides, and especially flight. We had a young lady who left our airport, went to a DPE about 15, 20 minutes away in the airplane, met the DPE at 9:00 in the morning, and was back at our airport at 11.
Wow.
Having flown the round trip and done the flight in the ground. So I don't know how they do it. I really don't. I know that I tell stories. Mine are probably longer than most of them are. The flight, however, that's going through all the maneuvers in the ACS. And I don't know what you could do to get that to an hour. I guess maybe you wouldn't fly the cross country. Maybe you only fly to the first checkpoint. Maybe you wouldn't do a diversion. I don't know. I've never asked anybody. It's not my business. But the other reason that the ground part, the ground part varies more based upon how well the student's prepared, whereas the flight part, it doesn't make a lot of difference. If you do a maneuver good or badly, it takes the same amount of time. If you hit the mark on your landing or you miss about 1,000 feet, it still took the same amount of time. Then maybe a little bit longer if you do, the two things that cover that is if you do go-arounds, which are certainly allowed from almost every landing, except for parallel for ace, everything else go-arounds are allowed. And it also depends upon how fast they fly, because on the cross-country, I have people who fly at 2,000 RPM cruise speed. We're getting passed by tricycles. I don't know why people fly an airplane and don't fly it fast. They're paid by the hour, not by the gallon, but they do.
Right.
But yeah, so I tell people I do not schedule more than one check ride in a day. There are people that do 2 or 3 a day, and good for them. I really don't know how they do it. I'm sure it's completely legitimate, and I'm just not as good as they are.
Well, it could be an advantage. I don't know. I prefer to slow things down a little bit, not feel rushed if I was in that situation. So I would appreciate that. This next slide is one that I really wanted to get to. And
we've got a lot of folks in our listenership that are really literally taking their discovery flights. And we know flight schools will tell them, oh, we can, get you here and out, in 45 hours, 50 hours, whatever the case may be. Not typically realistic numbers. So I found these very interesting. Ted, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
no, go ahead.
So I think we still have a lot of folks. So you're saying that the average private student in 2025 took 87 dual hours, 16 solo to the certificate for 103 total. But students who finished under the 12 months average only 80 hours total.
Correct.
What does training faster actually correlate with? Quality of instruction, student dedication, or is it something else?
It has to do with when you get into CFI and Thorndike's laws of learning, and it has to do with the recency and exercise. Let's say that you're learning to play the guitar, or you're learning to do whatever that music that Brian does, or you're learning to go do whatever. If you do it 3 times a week, you'll retain more than if you do it 1 time a week. And what happens, of course, in aviation is it's not just you learning and retaining. It's the fact that let's say, because some people, like high school students, we have a lot of high school students, they can usually only fly on weekends, especially in the wintertime. Can't get there before dark after school, which means that next weekend, that Saturday lesson they have, it's raining. And the next weekend, it's airplane broke and nothing else to replace it with. So maybe even last minute kind of thing, like the tire blew the day before. But therefore, in the next 3 weeks, you'll definitely be repeating that lesson. So that's one thing that the people who finish in less than 12 months, they are generally flying more often, more times during the week than the other people are. As you see at the bottom of that, it says the shortest anybody finished was in 4.7 months. I had a guy the year before that finished in 10 weeks. But he had plenty of time, plenty of money. He flew 4 times a week and knocked it out. And the longest last year was a guy that was almost 32 years. We see a lot of rusty pilots like that, start and stop, but you can't call them a quitter. So, but yeah, did you notice also on that chart, as you can see it, that those dual hours have been going up. The solo has been running 16, 17, 18, and dual's going from 64 to 87. I think the primary thing that is driving that is at a school, which most people go to school as multiple instructors, and those instructors are on the way to the airlines. And so they're having to change instructors because their instructor finished their 1,500 hours.
So to reframe that, and tell me if I'm wrong, Ron, but what you're saying here, but what this data says to me is in just the last 5 years, the time it takes to get your private pilot certificate has gone from 81 to 103 hours, which is a 20%-ish or more increase just in the last 5 years. And you believe that the largest reason or contributor to that drastic change is just the fact that we've got, these mills running and people are just abandoning their students halfway through.
Well, they're not abandoning; they're going off. So 20% increase in total. But look at the percentage increase when you look at dual. It's actually 30%, a third more, 64 compared to 87. So yes, you're seeing those people. Then you look up. The other thing that kind of gives a hint to that is look up because the FAA asked me about this first time I presented this data. I went back and gathered data from everybody else. How many dual hours do people here think it's reasonable to have before you solo an airplane? I know I did mine in 8, but then again, like I said, we didn't have all this other stuff. A lot of people are 10 to 15, maybe 20, right? The average for 2025 was 40 hours of dual before solo.
Yeah.
And that to me is just staggering. But I know because when I send out package to my students, I have them fill out the hours, and I can also when they're all their aeronautical experience, because so many instructors get that wrong and the students don't understand what they have to do. And so I see people doing, and this may again contribute to these number of dual hours. They're doing they're doing dual cross countries before solo flight. They're doing night flight before solo flight. They're doing things that have nothing to do with the person soloing the airplane. And I don't know why. I don't know if it just fit in their schedule.
That's interesting.
I would hope it's not just an instructor trying to get some extra money early. I don't know what it is, but that's been amazing. Now, I've had guys who, took 4 years and therefore they had 50 hours. That's understandable because they started and stopped a bunch. But you look at even the people who took less than 12 months still had 34 dual hours before they soloed. I personally think that's kind of criminal.
Let me describe some of the numbers that we're seeing for people. Basically, from the years 2021 to 2025, we're looking at the number of dual hours somebody had when they got their private and the number of solo hours they had. That solo number has stayed the same. Arguably, it's gone down, but it's all 17 hours plus or minus 1. Yep. The dual hours to private in 2021 was 64. by the time we hit 2025, it was 87. And it's just gone up every year by a bit each year. That's a 36% gain in those dual hours. So I don't know, in my mind, I think of 80 hours is kind of a target for going to a private check ride. And what we're seeing is 87 dual hours before the check ride. So those are large numbers.
Expensive
and
hours.
to add that up, it means that we've gone from 81 total hours to 103 total hours by the time they get to you for a check.
I had a guy who was probably mid-40s. So he wasn't a kid flying through one of the airlines. He took it 24 months, which is understandable. The person who has a job and is working to do whatever. In that 24 months, he had 8 instructors. He had each of them for 3 months and got each of them just by random choice at the end of their 1,500 hours. And he said, he wasn't mad. He said, I don't regret it. I'm a better pilot now. He said, but I had to prove myself by redoing stuff I'd already done for the previous instructor.
Yeah.
And so I think somebody who has a single instructor start to finish, which hardly ever happens nowadays, but if they do, I think those hours could easily be shorter.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I see is people showing up for check rides with 10.1, 10.2 hours of solo and 90 hours of dual. And I asked the instructor, why is that? And they said, well, I was trying to save them money. I said, no, you weren't. You could have taken 10 hours of dual, made them solo. He would have been personally been a better pilot. And you would have had other students to fly with anyway. They would have saved money. Because if you think about it, those people, without exception, struggle to land the airplane because of those 10 hours solo. At least 5 of them had to be a solo cross country, which means they only had 3 or 4 hours left to practice all maneuvers, including practicing landings. And instructors, especially young ones, are under the mistaken assumption that people get better when they fly with their instructor. Up to a point they do, but at some point, learning to fly is like learning to saw an airplane or land an airplane, I guess specifically, is like learning to dive off the 10-meter platform. Nobody has to tell you if you go in the water straight. So once you've done that, even going out and flying by yourself is how you get skilled at those things. Because when I teach students, once they've soloed every dual lesson after they're solo, I get out of the airplane and give them at least 15 minutes to run the pattern 2 or 3 times when they finished. Because that's where confidence comes from, is flying by yourself. Commercial, a lot of people, a lot of students, a lot of schools promote doing the commercial between paragraph 4 solo. They have them do it PDPIC, performing duties of pilot command. Same thing, because they, obviously they pay more money for that. That was created because nobody's going to fly multi-solo. But even for single, they do that. And I think it's because we have a generation that just doesn't have enough confidence, hasn't been told to fly solo enough to get confident about it.
So just kind of as a wrap up, and for those in the chat, we're going to do this into a doubleheader because there's so much more we want to get into. But Ron, do you track the demographics of your candidates for all the different check rides that you do for? And I'm not looking, maybe even by age brackets. I'm just curious, do the majority come from the school that you teach at? And are they younger generation? Is there anything, any comments?
I could go back and look at that because I got all the 8710s, the Acras. I could go back and pull that. It'd be interesting data. Had I been given a line that you asked him about. I could do that.
That's me. I'm going to ask you the tough ones.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
But I would say, just in general, I would expect, first off, about 60% of my check rides come from the school I teach at. So the other 40% come from others. This week, I've got people coming from Raleigh, Richmond, Greenville, South Carolina, Knoxville, Kentucky, Knoxville, Tennessee. So, but mainly for CFI initial, because there's not very many DPEs, not nearly as many DPEs that can do CFI initial. Being private, I got a person coming later this week from Raleigh. I don't know why. Maybe just, I don't know how he ended up with me, but anyway, he did. So I get that a little bit. And I would say probably 60 to 70% of those people are less than 25.
Okay.
That's my guess. And are on the airline track. Now, I've got some older people. I've had one of our guys, CFII, we had built his hours, and he went to airlines at age 57. So, but yeah, definitely as one of your commenters said, Nick Ballard, we definitely need more midlifers as CFI. That's why I'm trying to encourage you guys to do that, because that you have a knowledge base that these young students desperately need, and even the older students too. But it's the people who I think struggle the most are people who are trained by an instructor who spent their entire life in training. We had a young lady show up with us about 3 years ago. She had gone through a school, paid whatever, over $100,000 for. She had CFII multi-engine instructor altogether, and she had 11 months before she was a dental hygienist. Never been in a small airplane. So she was technically a good instructor because she could fly the airplane, but as far as anything else going on, she struggled with that.
Interesting.
I think of Brian, and if you want to talk about teaching somebody from experience rather than what you get as a younger instructor, and we're generalizing here, but speaking of density altitude and flying to Marfa, go ahead and explain that. If you've basically done most of your flying within 50 miles of home, you're going to have a lot of trouble doing that. You've only got so much you can speak to. If you've gone to Marfa, or you've been stranded on the Outer Banks, or whatever the story may be, those are the differences that I see. But this is just
not to mention just the time of being involved with other pilots and learning their craft and being a witness to the mastery of people like Ben.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
By the way, I think one of the commentators says, the cost of playing an instructor dollars seem unrealistic at many hours. That chart was done based upon the rates we had at the time. Our 172s at that time were 176 that are instructed for 55.
Okay.
So it depends upon the airplane. Matter of fact, if you want to change that number, just come to us and rent one of our SR22 turbos. It's right now, we make a bargain. It's their $540 an hour drive. I had about $120 for gas an hour, and the instructor's $140. So for around $800 an hour, that number would go up a little bit.
Just a little bit.
And there are people who do that.
Yeah.
I said a guy who shipped the oldest check I've ever given, the oldest private check I've ever given, was a guy 64, and he bought a SR22 turbo to learn to fly. So there are people out there that have money.
You could buy a lot of J3 Cubs for that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
One every 10 hours. Yeah.
So we're gonna do a part 2 here, Ron. Are you okay to hang out with us and do another round here? Okay, so just to wrap this up a little bit, we're going to be coming right back with, because I still want to talk about common failures and the marginal areas that you're uncovering all the time and experiencing. And then also, I want to dig a little bit more into the CFI picture, as well as also want to illuminate some of these human factors and the human side of what you're experiencing and what has impressed you or stuck with you as a DPE in your experience. So we're going to get into more of those things. In the meantime, Ben, do you want to conclude this episode and then invite everybody back for and Ted, maybe explain how this is all going to work? These double headers can be very complicated.
Yeah, let me explain it here. When we say we're coming right back, if you're listening to this on the podcast, we'll see you next week. If you're listening to this on the live stream, just stay here. We'll be back within 5 minutes. So we have trouble. We're not very smart. We have trouble pretending that we're going to see you in a week. And so that's why we talk in both terms. So Ben, you want to take us out of this?
Be happy to. So I want to remind everybody, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and hit subscribe on your app. And I'll go ahead and ask just to make sure we don't have any other comments for the good of the order.
No, thank you, Ron, and we'll see you again in 3 minutes.
Yes.
Oh, I know.
All right.
So this comes from the AOP Bank of Wisdom, is I think what they refer to it as. The worse the weather, the more likely it is that you'll have a vocal passenger insisting that you go. Signing off, episode 182 of the Midlife Pilot Podcast. Thanks, everybody.